Yes, peace, shalom. How's everybody doing? This is Yeshaya Yisrael of the tribe of Dan of the nation of the Israelites. Want to first and foremost give honor and praise unto Yah, the creator of heaven and earth. This right here is part 3. The children of Israel are not white. I have a book here. We're going to start external and biblical at the same time. I have a book here entitled The Bible Myth, The African Origins of the Jewish People. Now, a lot of times you have brothers who are in the so-called conscious community. They quote this book quite often to try to bash or go against the children of Israel. And part of the thesis of this book is as follows, which in this presentation I will attempt to show and disprove. It says the Bible myth contends that the 12 tribes of Israel never existed. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were characters from Egyptian mythology. The first Israelites were Egyptians, followers of the pharaoh Akhenaten. Now, one of the things that people who are in the so-called conscious community and who like to ride upon this book here entitled The Bible Myth, The African Origins of the Jewish People. First it says Bible, so that's already seemed controversial to people. Myth, so that makes people interested. Then they got that 6-point star symbol, that's another subject. Then they got the African, that makes automatically people who are in the so-called conscious community run to it. Origins of the Jewish people. Now there's something on here in the cover that the author forgot to mention. That is the fact that you can't sit there and on the back talk about the first Israelites were Egyptians and then you want to sit there and say it's the African origins, because ancient Egypt did not claim all of Africa. And during this presentation I will attempt to show that this right here, this word that you see right here, Jewish, is a myth itself. So now that is the thesis in which I'm coming from to try to show and prove where we stand as far as Israelites. Now, remember what he stated in here, that it says, the Bible myth contends that the 12 tribes of Israel never existed. The first Israelites were Egyptians, followers of the pharaoh Akhenaten. Those two parts right there are very important to remember, because we're going to go over a little bit of the history to show emphatically that the Israelites were not followers of Akhenaten. And where they get that kind of understanding from is trying to sit there and insinuate that Akhenaten was the father of monotheism, which actually in college courses they would tell you that Akhenaten got what he got from his mother, Queen Tayi. So how can he been the father of monotheism if he actually got the concept from his mother? That's actually incorrect. You understand? So furthermore, monotheism was known prior to Akhenaten. Monotheism basically is saying one has a belief in one God. The difference between what Akhenaten was about and what the children of Israel was about is what they considered to be God in the first place. Akhenaten worshiped what they referred to as the faceless God. Now, what he exactly did was take all the Egyptian gods and temples and burnt them up and had them smashed, and he set up his own thing. And you see Akhenaten in pictures. I'm not getting into that right now, but you will see Akhenaten in pictures paying libations off to the sun. Aten is the Egyptian word in reference to the physical sun. Now, in the book of Deuteronomy, in the Torah, we can go to Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 2. Deuteronomy 17, verse 2. And it says this: If there be found among you in any of your cities which the Lord thy God giveth thee, a man or woman who commits, which is evil in the sights of the Lord your God, to violate his covenant, and he will go and serve other gods, and prostrate himself to them, or to the sun, or to the moon, or to any of the hosts of heaven, which I have not commanded. So that right there just goes to show that even if you want to say you're monotheistic, in the Hebrew culture, saying you only worship the sun or pay libations to the sun, that right there is still against the Israelite culture. So no, brothers and sisters, this gentleman right here, Gary Greenberg, is emphatically incorrect by trying to insinuate that the Israelites were followers of Akhenaten. As a matter of fact, when the Israelites did, in the time of Ezekiel, worship the Egyptian gods, the prophets of Israel condemned them verbally for doing such. So the cultures itself was emphatically different. Okay, so let that be understood. Next point to go into is I have a book here entitled The Ancient Black Hebrews and Arabs. Now I'm going to read in this book part of it on page 44. And it says this in the introduction in part 2, The Ancient Arabs. It is generally assumed that black people are only found in the sub-Saharan Africa as indigenous populations. The truth is black people can be found as indigenous populations throughout Asia from the westernmost to the eastern extremity. In this book, we shall reveal the origin of the black Arabs of Arabia and look at the origins of, quote, Arab ethnicity. One of the oldest doctors known from history is the Roman medical expert Galen, Galen. He made a comment which can only be understood as showing that the ancient Arabs of his day were black. The Ethiopians, Arabs, and other southern peoples, the skin had been roasted by the ambient heat and by the effect of the internal heat being drawn outwards, and so becomes hard, dry, and black. Now that right there is from the quote from the book, The Ancient Arabs, The Ancient Black Arabs, The Ancient Black Hebrews and Arabs. And that was on page 44 of that book. So now we can know and understand that the people in the Arabian area were people of color, according even to Roman historians, and so forth and so on. Have another reference concerning this subject here, and it actually comes from the actual scriptures itself. All right. Now, in here, within the scriptures itself, let's go to Ezekiel chapter 27, verse 21. We are in the book of the prophet Ezekiel 27. We're going to start in verse 21 and see what it says. Ezekiel chapter 27, we are in verse 21. And it speaks about Israel in relation to the other nations with Tyre. It says this: Dedan was thy merchant and precious clothes for chariots. Arabia and all the princes of Kedar, they occupied with thee and lambs and rams and goats, and these were thy merchants. So this right here just goes to show in the history that the people of Arabia had contact with the people of Tyre as well as the people of the children of Israel in history. That was the point in going over that. So if the Romans themselves are recorded in history as saying that the Arabs were swarthy or very dark in color, or black as we may say today, and we reading about something that happened prior to the time of the Romans with the same Arabian people, obviously the people Ezekiel also was speaking about were people of color. Okay? Now, let's go into another aspect concerning this. The fact is that the children of Israel is mentioned over 2,000 times in the scriptures, and they were, as will be shown, the people of color. The Egyptians were mentioned in the scriptures over 500 times. The Ethiopians mentioned over 30 times. The Canaanites mentioned over 200 times. So all of these people who are of color in the scriptures, and by that I'm mainly in speaking of the Old Testament, they are people of color, and the number of them exceeds in mentioning over 1,000 times. The Europeans or the white people that are mentioned in the Old Testament does not exceed past 20. So here you have less than 20, and there in the other aspect you have over 1,000. So now we can look at hindsight and see what exactly is the book speaking about and who the book is speaking about. It is not, brothers and sisters, speaking of a people known as white people. Okay? So now, for the next quote, I like to go into this book here entitled The Complete Works of Josephus. And in this book here, on page 54, we see this. The Book of Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews, Book 2, verse 4. It says this. Josephus speaking as a historian. I think it necessary to mention those names that I may disprove such as believe that we, meaning the Jews or the Israelites, such as believe that we came not originally from Mesopotamia, but are Egyptians. Now Jacob had 12 sons. Of these Joseph was come there before. We still, therefore, set down the names of Jacob's children and grandchildren. Reuben had 4 sons, Anok, Palu, Asron, and Carmi. Simeon had 6, Yemuel, Yamin, Arod, Yakim, Zoar, Shaul. Levi had 3 sons, Gershom, Kohath, Merari. Judah had 3 sons, Shalach, Perez, and Zerah. And by Perez 2 grandchildren, Esrom and Amor. Issachar had 4 sons, Tola, Pua, Yashob, Shombron. Zebulun had with him 3 sons, Sered, Kelon, Yalel. So far in the posterity of Leah, with them went with her daughter Dinah. These were 33. Rachel had 2 sons, the name of whom Joseph had 2 sons also, Manasseh and Ephraim. The other, Benjamin, had 10 sons, Balu, Balkor, Asabel, Gera, Naaman, Yaish, Rosh, Mump, Open, and Ard. These 14 added to the 33 before enumerated amount to the number of 47. And this was their legitimate posterity of Jacob. He had besides by Bilhah, the handmaid of Rachel, Dan and Naphtali, which the last had 4 sons followed him, Yesel, Guni, Israri, and Shelem. Dan had only begotten a son, Cushim. If these are added to the number before mentioned, they complete the number of 54. Gad and Asher were the sons of Zilpah, who had the handmaid of Leah. These had with them Gad 7 sons, Shephoniah, August, Sunis, Azabon, Aaron, Eroed, Ariel. Asher had a daughter Sarah and 6 male children, whose names were Yamni, Isis, Isoi, Boris, Abar, Malkiel. If we add these, which are 16 to the 54, the forementioned number 70 is completed, Jacob not being himself included in that number. Now, these names that I read are in the book of Josephus, and obviously you can see that they had their Greek pronunciations with it. Now, let it be known and understood, brothers and sisters, that the pronunciations that I stated was not all biblical or Hebrew, but rather the Greek understanding or the writing of that. So let that be understood. If you wanted to know the names of the children of Israel from the Hebraic way, you can go emphatically in your own time into the book of Chronicles itself. But one of the main points I wanted to make concerning that is the fact that it distinctly says, and I quote, I think it necessary to mention those names that I may disprove such as believe that we came not originally from Mesopotamia, but are Egyptians. So Josephus right there is speaking about when the Israelites went into Egypt, that the people in history thought that the Israelites themselves were Egyptians. And so he wanted to state emphatically that he and the Israelites did not come from the Egyptian line of people, but rather they were from the people from Mesopotamia, such as when you read in Genesis where Joseph stated, Gunab ti me edet ha-Ibrim. Indeed, I was stolen from the land of the Hebrews. That's in Genesis chapter 40 and Genesis chapter 41 when Joseph speaks of where he came from. The land of the Hebrews is in later times known as the Levant. And in the Akkadian record, this was called the land of the Kabiru or the Kabiri. Okay, so let that be known and understood. So the Hebrew people was actually a conglomerate of people. And when these Hebrew people went into the land of Egypt, the Egyptians, when you read in the writings of the 12th and 13th dynasty of Egypt, which they refer to as the Middle Kingdom of Egypt, they called them the Setyu, Setyu. Another term they called them was the Amu, Ammu. And that basically in layman terms in Egyptian means Asiatic. So let that be known and understood. So therefore, once again, this gentleman here, Gary Greenberg, and his book, The Bible Myth, The African Origins of the Jewish People, shows to be incorrect in his stance. The children of Israel did exist, and they were not followers of Akhenaten. Alrighty? Because you can't sit there and state the premise of your book is that the 12 tribes of Israel did not exist and then turn right around and then sit there and state that the original Israelites were followers of Akhenaten. You're trying to play games. That's basically what you're trying to do. Alrighty. So now let's move on. If we go into this part here, another secular reference. Remember the book of Josephus spoke about how the Israelites were thought of as to be Egyptians. Same was done in the book of Genesis chapter 50. Same was done with the prophet Moses with the daughters of Jethro. I want to sit there and show a picture of this here. This here is a picture of an Egyptian in the ancient world. And as we see here, this man pictured here is what you would call, in layman terms, black or ebony hue. And this is an image of what the Israelites in history were thought of to be by the people who were historians themselves. Okay? So let that be understood, because when they saw the Israelites, they sit there and felt that they were actually from those people. Now, a lot of the times people try to state that Moses was mistaken in Exodus chapter 2 as an Egyptian because of the clothes that he wore. That also shows it to be emphatically incorrect, because I can sit there and wear a European suit. I could wear a Tommy Hilfiger or a Calvin Klein or what have you, suit and tie, but everybody knows good and well that the person that's doing this presentation, the brother Yeshaya, is not a European. I am not an American, regardless of the fact that my pictures even show me with a suit and tie on. That's not who you are, regardless. All right, so getting back into the same point and premise here. I have a book written actually by one of my teachers, a man who I have a lot of respect for. His name is Kohen Mikael. And in his book here entitled Israelites and Jews, The Significant Difference, we're going to get into some history now. We read this. The historian Philo, who lived from 40 BC to 40 AD, who lived in Alexandria in Egypt, stated that 1 million Hebrews resided in Libya and Egypt from the Catabasmos to the border of Ethiopia. The teacher also quotes this here. E. Shona, in his book, Lost Tribes of Myth, says the following. There was a period of over 600 years between Zephaniah and Philo, and considering the new wave of immigrants coming into Africa, they had 600 years to penetrate toward all the borders of Ethiopia. Hebrewism was detected by its inscriptions from the Egyptian border westward across North Africa to Mauritania. The Greek historian and geographer Strabo wrote concerning the Hebrews of Cyrene in Libya. Now these Hebrews already have gotten into all cities, and it is hard to find a place in the habitable earth that have not emitted this tribe of men, and is not possessed by it. And it has come to pass that Egypt and Cyrene, Libya, that is, as having the same governors, and a great many of the nations initiate their way of living. Now, one of the things to point out that the author here, Kohen Mikael, is presenting in his book, Israelites and Jews, The Significant Difference, and this here is actually the quote from the page itself, page 15. He is speaking about saying that the historian Philo, who lived from the 1st century BC into the 1st century AD, stated that you had 1 million Hebrews that lived in Libya and Egypt, from the Catabasmos to the border of Ethiopia. So the area in which we're talking about is what you will call today Egypt, Libya, Sudan, and Ethiopia. And all those places there are people where places in northern Africa and in East Africa are people of color. Okay? And that's where the children of Israel eventually migrated to. A biblical reference for that is easily found in the book of Isaiah, chapter 11, verse 11 through 12, where it actually mentions places like Egypt, Patros, Ethiopia, and so forth and so on, speaking about where Israel and Judah scattered and was outcast too. Now, when we go, brothers and sisters, that's Isaiah 11 for those who missed the quote. The same book here, Israelites and Jews, The Significant Difference. On page 82, my teacher stated the following here, and it says this. When the Greeks and Romans invaded the East, the Edomites migrated into Europe and assimilated with other cultures, carrying the acquired Israelite traits with them. Hebrew language is not of European origin. Wanted to state that emphatically because one of the things to point out is the history of what happened with the children of Esau or the Edomites. My teacher stated in his book here, when the Greeks and Romans invaded the East, the Edomites migrated into Europe and assimilated with other cultures, carrying the acquired Israelite traits with them. So now, when the Greeks came to power after the time of Alexander, we're talking now in the 4th and into the 3rd century BCE. And when that situation happened, the Edomites were still preparing their way to go into the land of Europe. Now, by the time the emperors of Rome came along, such as Julius Caesar, he was friends with Herod and his father Herod, the son of Antipater. And this particular alliance that Julius Caesar had with Herod, and Herod was an Edomite, allowed the Edomites to have gained way into the land of Europe itself. So sometimes you have Israelites who teach that the Edomites are all Europeans or all white people, but that's emphatically incorrect. The Edomites joined on with the Europeans in trying to go against the children of Israel. Now, when the Israelites fell in history, the Edomites acquiring the Israelites' substances, like the book of Obadiah speaks about, neither should you have put your hand on Jacob's substance. They took the things that the Israelites had and went further off into Europe with it. When they went further off into Europe, we're going to discuss in a minute what happened then. Continuing on in the book that my teacher presented, Israelites and Jews, A Significant Difference, written by Kohen Mikael, a man who actually taught me Hebrew, because a lot of times people online say, Yeshaya, how you learned Hebrew? Kohen Mikael was my Hebrew teacher. Okay, so now we're going to continue on in this here. I have a book here entitled The Apocrypha. And here is it right here, The Apocrypha. Now I'm going to read part of it, and in this one I give a lot of respect to the brothers who are messianic in this case, such as those who come from ISUPK, Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge, because I get a lot of my knowledge and my quotes about the Apocrypha from those brothers. And in the book of First Maccabees, chapter 3, verse 48, we read about when the Greeks came into the land of Israel. And here is some of the things that it stated that the Greeks did. It says this, and they laid open the book of the law, wherein the heathen had sought to paint the likeness of their images. They brought also the priest's garments and the first fruits in the tithes, and the Nazarites they stirred up, who had accomplished their days. So one of the things to point out, First Maccabees chapter 3 emphatically is speaking about saying, they laid open the book of the law, wherein the heathen had sought to paint the likeness of their images. So they tried to sit there, the Greeks that is, under this now being the Ptolemies and the Seleucids, so forth and so on, who tried to sit there and have the Israelite records and paint the Greek images within the Israelite records. So now you have Bibles nowadays with European images. Meanwhile, the scriptures itself speaks about Egypt, Ethiopia, Sumeria, all those different places of color. But the pictures they try to show in their imagery, because pictures are worth 1,000 words, they try to sit there and present that out there by saying, well, these people could have not have been black. Even though you're reading in Songs of Solomon, I am black. Even though Job chapter 30, verse 30 says, my skin is black upon me. But the picture's already there from when you're 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. So by the time you really know how to read with comprehension, 17, 18, 19, 20, you already been filled in with European images. So they knew exactly what they was doing with their imagery. So this right here in the Apocrypha shows how the Greeks, even in the ancient world, when the ancient Israelites still had some kind of footing in the world, the Greeks tried to make their images into the Israelite writings itself. All right? Now, I want to sit there and go back into the book that my teacher wrote, Israelites and Jews, The Significant Difference. And on page 78, we read the following. Page 78, we read the following. It says this, an Israelite is a descendant of the ancient nation of Israel. A Jew is a member of a religion called Judaism, which attempts to practice the laws, traditions, and customs of ancient Israel. So let that be known and understood. You have it stated right here. An Israelite is a descendant of the ancient nation of Israel. Now, on the other hand, a Jew is a member of a religion called Judaism, which attempts to practice the laws, traditions, and customs of ancient Israel. So when did these people who, as my teacher also pointed out in the same book, these Edomites get a hold to even become anything called a Jew? Brothers and sisters, what has to be known and understood in history is that you had the individual who was of the Hasmoneans. His name was John Hyrcanus. And you can read about the history of him and actually in the book of Josephus. What he did, he being an Israelite himself, taught the Edomites. The Edomites at this time were called by the Greeks and by the Romans as Idumeans. And John Hyrcanus of the Hasmoneans themselves being Israelites, taught the Edomites the ways of the nation of Israel. And this being approximately, we're talking now, within the second and first century BCE. So now, as my teacher Cohen Mikael pointed out in his book, when the Greeks and Romans invaded the East, that you had the Edomites going into Europe and carrying with them the things that they acquired of the Israelites. All right, so let that be known and understood. Going back into this other source right here, the Hebrew heritage of Black Africa. I wanted to sit there and go into this book here, and on page 78, we read the following. It states this in the second paragraph. Who are the white Jews if the black man comes from the ancient Hebrews? There is considerable scholarly evidence that white Jews are largely the descendants of ancient Roman, Greek, Turkish, Armenian, and other Caucasian groups who adopted or converted to Judaism over the centuries. So I wanted to point that out right there, that the author of this book, Moses Farrar, he stated that who are the white Jews if the black man comes from the ancient Hebrews. So we already shown pictures of how the ancient Hebrews would have looked in history. The Arabians were black, the Hebrews were black, the Egyptians were black. The historian Josephus spoke about how the Israelites were mistaken as Egyptians. The Bible talks about such when you go into the book of Exodus with the prophet Moses. So theoretically and historically and accurately, the children of Israel were a people of color, or what we will call black today. So therefore, we have to then ask, who is the white Jew if the black man comes from the ancient Hebrews? Now, according to some of these other people, so-called scholars in this aspect, this right here is called The Destruction of Black Civilization by Chancellor Williams. Now, in part two of this presentation, I read part of it, and I want to read another part of it. Or actually the same part, or should I say, I want to read it again on page 337. Because when I read this book, when I was not trying to be funny, when I was at the age of 15, kind of like took me aback. You know, I was like, something is wrong with that concept. All right, it says here, the Hebrews and the Arabs are both white Semitic peoples, and no number of offsprings by non-Hebrews and non-Arabs or adherents to either religion will either change this absolute fact. See, what these people, such as this character, Chancellor Williams, attempts to do is try to discredit the fact that the ancient Hebrews and the ancient Arabs were black. We already went over that in part two. But here's the punchline right here, read once again. But the white Jews, parentheses, Hebrews, and white Arabs remain exactly what they always were, white. Are you serious? You can't be serious by saying that these people were white. And so that's why I like to quote the other book that I mentioned, and that book being the ancient black Hebrews and Arabs, because you have a lot of people in the so-called conscious community who try to sit there and state emphatically that the people who were black were only from the land of Egypt, North Egypt, all the way to South Africa, and then going all the way west to Gambia and Sudan, and as if everybody else in the world was white. That is it, or non-black, should I say? That's emphatically incorrect. And as I pointed out earlier in this presentation, all right. So as stated, this gentleman here, Chancellor Williams, is emphatically incorrect. So what I will then now like to get into, brothers and sisters, is the fact of saying that in the so-called conscious community, they attempt to bash the house of Israel. And so therefore we have to then ask, who funds this? Who actually goes and supports this idea? It is emphatically these same Edomites that went into Europe in the ancient world, portraying themselves as to be the Jews or as to be the ancient house of Israel. All right? That's who funds that. Because then they had to sit there and give an explanation on what happened to the true house of Israel. So they came up with all kinds of weird concepts, such as the tribe of Dan is destroyed, such as saying that in the Talmud they teach that the 10 lost tribes will never be returned, emphatically incorrect. And this is why you find the Judaism aspect quoting more of the Talmud and be it separated by what they call the Mishnah and the Gemara, as opposed to more so the Torah and the Hebrew scriptures. You understand? Now, I have a book here entitled, and now this one here is very controversial. It's called The 13th Tribe. The cover of it actually got torn off. But it's written by Ufla Kosler in his book, The 13th Tribe. Now, he was actually a European white Jew himself. Now, this is what he has to state about how the Europeans, or the later people known as Khazars, became Jews. And on page 16 of this book, we read the following. How important, in quantitative terms, is the presence, quote, of the Caucasian sons of Japhet in the tents of Shem? One of the most radical proponents of the hypothesis concerning the Khazar origins of Jewry is the professor of medieval Jewish history at Tel Aviv University. In his book, Khazaria was published in 1944 in Tel Aviv, and a second edition in 1951. In his introduction, he writes that the facts demand a new approach both to the problem of the relations between the Khazar Jewry and other Jewish communities, and to the question of how far we can go in regarding that this Khazar Jewry as the nucleus of the large Jewish settlement in Eastern Europe. The descendants of this settlement, those who stayed where they were, those who emigrated to the United States and to other countries, and those who went to Israel, constitute now a large majority of the world Jewry. Now, this author goes on to state this. This was written before the full extent of the Holocaust was known. But that does not alter the fact that the large majority of surviving Jews in the world is of Eastern European, and thus perhaps mainly of Khazar origin. If so, this would mean that their ancestors came not from the Jordan, but from the Volga, not from Canaan, but from the Caucasus, once believed to be the cradle of the Aryan race, and that genetically they were more closely related to the Hun, Ugur, and Megayah tribes than to the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Should this turn out to be the case, then the term anti-Semitism will become void of meaning, based on a misapprehension shared by both the killers and their victims. The story of the Khazar Empire, as it slowly emerges from the past, begins to look like one of the most cruel hoaxes which history has ever perpetrated. Now, in the back of this book, he speaks about the Khazars and says this. Therefore, the Khazars found themselves in a precarious position between the two major world powers, the Eastern Roman Empire and Byzantium, and the triumphant followers of Muhammad. As Mr. Kosler points out, the Khazars were the third world of their day, and they chose a surprising method of resisting both the Western pressure to become Christian and the Eastern to adopt Islam. Rejecting both, they converted to Judaism. Now, one of the things I wanted to point out in building up this situation right here historically is that it was the Edomites that my teacher Kohen Mikael pointed out in his book, Israelites and Jews, The Significant Difference. It was actually the Edomites, when they went over into Europe, that taught the people of the Khazars, who were a Turkish stock of people, about the things about being anything closely related to a Hebrew, an Israelite, or a Jew. And that they were later pushed further Eastern Europe by the armies of Genghis Khan and were not of the true house of Israel. The European Jews that you see over in Flatbush, in Western Flatbush, Brooklyn, or in Crown Heights, or Brooklyn, or that you see in Atlantic City, New Jersey, or that you see in Miami, Florida, or that you see even in Atlanta, Israel today, are not the true house of Israel. And that's one of the main points to present that. Because since they are not the true house of Israel, we then got to sit there and ask, what spirit did this guy, Gary Greenberg, another European Jew, had to state? He knows good and well that the true house of Israel is waking up to the truth. So to try to throw a monkey wrench, what these people try to do, such as Gary Greenberg and Chancellor Williams, is try to sit there and propose the idea that the Hebrews never existed, or if the Hebrews did exist, like Chancellor Williams stated, they were white. So we are attempting to show good and well that's emphatically incorrect. Okay, for the next reference and the next quote, I like to go back to the same book, The 13th Tribe, a very controversial book. By the way, historically, the man Arthur Koestler did not commit suicide. All right? He died by other means. Just like they try to sit there and state that Gary Webb, who was exposed in the drug cartel, committed suicide by shooting himself 2 times in the back of the head. Regardless of your race, that's not the issue in this aspect. Gary Webb was a white man exposed in the criminal activity of the drugs and the government. There's no way in the world that you shoot yourself in the back of the head twice. But they label it as a suicide. Just like they try to sit there and label the situation with Arthur Koestler miraculously, supposedly just jumping out of a window and he committed suicide. No, brothers and sisters. Arthur Koestler, like Gary Webb, exposed a lot and was thus murdered. All right, now in this same book here, The 13th Tribe, on page 72, we read the following. This is speaking about King Joseph, not Joseph in the Bible, but King Joseph of the Khazars. He says this: Joseph then proceeds to provide a genealogy of his people. Though a fierce Jewish nationalist, proud of wielding the scepter of Judah, quote unquote, he cannot and does not claim for them Shemitic descent. He traces their ancestry not to Shem, but to Noah's third son, Japheth, or more precisely to Japheth's grandson, Togarmah, the ancestor of all Turkish tribes. We have found in the family registers of our fathers, King Joseph of the Khazars asserts boldly that Togarmah had 10 sons, and the names of their offspring are as follows: Ugar, Dosur, Avars, Huns, Basili, Taniak, Khazars, Zagora, Bulgars, Sabir. We are the sons of Khazar the seventh. The identity of some of these tribes, with names spelt in the Hebrew script, is rather dubious, but that hardly matters. The characteristic feature of this genealogical exercise is the amalgamation of the genesis of Turkish tribal tradition. So I wanted to point out emphatically that according even to Khazarian history, they state that they come not from the line of Shem, but rather from Japheth, the third son of Noah, and namely from his son or grandson, the seventh child of Togarmah, which they said was named Khazar. So brothers and sisters, the European Jew in his history comes from the line of the Khazars. Now, for those who might want to see a video that's much more extensive about that subject, you can go on YouTube and type in Ted Pike, T-E-D, first name, P-I-K-E, Ted Pike. And the video is called The Other Israel. And in that video, it shows how the European Jews are not the lineal descendants of the 12 tribes of the nation of Israel. All right. So therefore, people such as Chancellor Williams is incorrect. And because people like Gary Greenberg can't prove that he comes from the line of Israel, he didn't try to sit there and state, oh, the Israelites were Africans, to try to sit there and throw the true house of Israel off by having us into the idols of ancient Kemet, which caused the nation of Israel and the tribe of Judah in Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 6 and 7 to fall in the first place. All right, so they're very clever in what they're doing. Alrighty, I'd like to now go into another reference. And this time we're going to deal scripturally. In the book of Daniel, or Daniel, chapter 9, verse 11. Here's what we read. Daniel, chapter 9, verse 11. And it says this: Yea, all Israel have transgressed your law, even by departing, that they might not obey your voice. Therefore the curse is poured upon us, and the oath that is written in the law of Moses, the servant of God, because we have sinned against him. So what this right here is saying is that all Israel have transgressed your law, by departing that they might not obey your voice. The curse, therefore, that is written in the oath of the law of Moses, the man of God, is poured upon the house of Israel. So let's understand some of these curses that the prophet Moses spoke about. Let's go, if you will, to Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter. Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter, we're going to start in verse 43. The stranger that is within thee, shall mount above thee very high, and thou shalt come down very low. He shall lend to thee, and thou shalt not lend to him. He shall be the head, and thou shalt be the tail. It says concerning the nation of Israel in these curses, moreover, all these curses shall come upon thee, and shall pursue thee and overtake thee, till thou be destroyed, because you did not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to keep his commandments and the statutes which he commanded thee. So that right there just goes to show you that the curse that Deuteronomy 28 by the prophet Moses is talking about is what Daniel in Daniel chapter 9 is also speaking about. So Deuteronomy 28, which is known commonly by many Israelites as the blessing and the curses and the curse that came upon us, Daniel in the 5th and 6th century BCE was talking about those curses were already coming upon them from then. Now we can sit there and put it even in our day and time. It distinctly says, he shall lend to thee, and thou shalt not lend to him. He shall be the head, and thou shalt be the tail. Now, here's a question that we have to ask. If the so-called European Jew, and the Bible is trusted by many, is the people of the Bible, how do we explain the Israelite prophet Daniel saying that the curses came upon the house of Israel and still say that the European Jew is the nation of Israel? I have a book here entitled The International Jew, Another Controversial One, by Henry Ford. And on page 16, speaking of the European Jews, we read this. And this is why I asked the question. Because remember, it distinctly says concerning the curses that will come upon Israel, you shall be the tail and not the head. The stranger shall lend to you. You shall not lend to him. Let's see who does the lending. To make a list of lines of businesses controlled by the Jews of the United States will be to touch most of the vital industries of the country, those which are really vital and those which cultivated habit have been made to seem vital. The theoretical business is exclusively Jewish. Play producing, booking, theater operation are all in the hands of Jews. The motion picture industry, the sugar industry, the tobacco industry, 50% or more of the meat packing industry, which also includes pork because they feel they don't touch it, they still are right, but they still deal with it. The motion picture industry, the sugar industry, the tobacco industry, 50% or more of the meat packing industry, over 60% of the shoemaking industry, most of the musical purveying done in the country, jewelry, grain, cotton, oil, steel, magazine authorship, news distribution, pay attention, news distribution, the liquor business, the loan business. These, to name only the industries with national and international sweep, are in control of the Jews of the United States, either alone or in association with Jews overseas. So, one of the things to point out here, it distinctly says that the Jewish people in the United States, them and the Jewish people across the United States and beyond the United States, they operate the loan business. Nobody loans to the Jewish man. So when the state of Israel gets X amounts of billions, that's Jewish people in the United States giving to other Jewish people. So what's going on, brothers and sisters? The children of Israel, our people, we are the ones who go for loans. When you go into college, and I teach in the college, but when you go into college, brothers and sisters, and you go to the bursars or the office there, and you go to speak to the financial aid department, 9 times out of 10, it's a Jewish person that approves that. They are the ones who give the loans and the grants and so forth and so on. The curses that Daniel chapter 9 speaks about, and speaking about the prophet Moses in Deuteronomy chapter 28, distinctly says, he shall lend to you, you should not lend to him. Therefore, by the position of authority that the Jewish man has, he is not the cursed house of Israel. So ethnically, color-wise, racial-wise, economical and social-wise, the European Jew is not the children of Israel. So therefore, people such as this gentleman right here, Chancellor Williams, talking about the Jews were white, you're mistaken. Okay? So let's continue on. Brothers and sisters, what I'm attempting to explain, I hope is not offensive, disrespectful, or intended in that nature. It is meant with love, compassion, and for the sake of a word, grace. So I say shalom concludes part 3.